Since its inception in 1997, Sydney Open has invited audiences on a journey of architectural wanderlust, allowing them to unlock the doors of the city's most historically and culturally significant places. This year we continue to deliver on this tradition of cultural immersion through a reimagined program of unique outdoor moments and rich online experiences, including tonight's live industry panel talk, Creative Placemaking. My name's Adam Lindsay. I'm Executive Director of Sydney Living Museums and the State Archives and Records Authority of New South Wales. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are presenting from tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. And also to pay my respects to the traditional custodians of the lands on which you are all watching and listening from. I'm excited you've joined us this evening for the launch of Sydney Open 2021 and warmly welcome you to our industry panel titled Creative Placemaking. I'd like to acknowledge the very generous support of our major partners, Built and Key Quarter Sydney, our presenting partner, BVN Architecture, and the support of so many others. At Sydney Living Museums and the State Archives and Records Authority, we bring together exhibitions, programs and collections to tell the rich and evolving stories of Sydney's cultural heritage. These are inextricably linked to place. Much like effective placemaking, they bring the city's rich past in exciting collision with its present and future to create new meaning and relevance for our audiences. In our opening talk tonight, we'll hear from leading industry experts from Built, Key Quarter Sydney and Turf Design Studio on how creative placemaking helps to shape Sydney's cultural identity and how it can be a force for positive change in a city that is starting to reopen. I'm delighted to introduce tonight's moderator, April McCabe, Associate Director Strategy and Planning with Cred Consulting.
Welcome everyone and thank you for joining us for Sydney Open 2021 Creative Placemaking Industry Panel. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we're presenting from tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. As I said, my name is April McCabe and I've got the pleasure of moderating tonight's panel, and we're coming live from the Gold Melting Room at the Mint on Macquarie Street. We also will tonight have some time to answer your questions, so don't forget to ask your questions in the comments and we'll come back to them at the end of the discussion. And please follow Sydney Living Museums online and comment with the hashtag #SydneyIsOpen and follow across Twitter and Instagram at @SydneyIsOpen. So, to get started for tonight, I'd like to get the panel to introduce themselves, and I'm going to throw a question at them while they're introducing themselves. I want them to start off by telling us what are 3 ingredients that you think are critical to creating great public places. So first, I want to introduce to you John O'Coddy, Development Director at Built.
Thanks, April. My name's John. I'm the Development Director at Built. We sort of are a builder developer who like to focus on strategic projects when we can add our skills in developing particularly heritage buildings into our developments and take on that sort of builder risk. And I think some of the placemaking sort of ingredients that make the most sense to me are the personality of it all. So having a space have that personal touch, and you want to feel safe, you want to feel calm in the space there. You also want to have the right climatic conditions, so the right scale to the buildings around it and the forms as well. And you want to feel safe. You want to kind of be in there. You want to have a safe space that works well.
Great, thanks, Jono. We're looking forward to exploring that sort of personality of places a bit through the discussion tonight. Our next speaker is Mike Horn, the Director of Turf Design Studio. Over to you, Mike.
Hi, April. We're in a small atelier studio, design studio, landscape architects, urban designers working across mostly major projects, precinct level projects. We're working on the Aerotropolis right now, Redfern, North Everleigh, Bays West, those kind of projects. I've worked on Central Park for the last 14 years, I think, almost continuously through a number of, through the master plan with Foster and Partners through to current DAs with Alexander's on the brewery. And also our practice works across very urban projects. We're very public domain focused, but also across more kind of ecological projects as well, like Sydney Park. The water reuse project that we did for the City of Sydney a few years ago now is one of those.
Yep.
So we're very interested in how you make great places for people in those contexts and weaving in all the different preconditions. What are the ingredients? Well, first of all, I would say they've got to be places for people. There's got to be green. And they've got to be, I don't know. It's finding that magical point in a project like that, and it's usually the sort of DNA, the place DNA. We used to say genius loci,
Yep.
but it's finding that place, and it's often just what's there, and instead of like missing that. I think
great.
listening.
And I have to say, congratulations! The award winning for the Sydney Park work was announced last night, so well done for that.
You.
So
thank you.
And our final speaker as well to introduce himself and to answer that first question is Matt McPhee, who is the Precinct General Manager for Key Quarter Sydney AMP Capital. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks, April. I think I've got the greatest job in the world at the moment. Though it's tough to follow a Latin phrase in an award-winning design. So I have the privilege of overseeing Key Quarter Sydney and its constituent elements. I've been working on that project for the last 12 months with an extraordinary development team and building team, and I think it's over too many years' experience, the best articulation of a vision and a completion of the vision, and the best opportunity for us to showcase our capabilities as a city to the rest of the world as we come out of COVID. For me, the elements that resonate most are storytelling, are having a reason for being and having something that connects back into people's experiences, and that'll be so much more important with our post-COVID world. There's also authenticity in what we do. You've got to be genuinely committed to you've got to be a true believer, you've got to drink the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
Especially when you mix heritage in with commercial realities, and you want people to have genuine experiences when they come into these places that you're creating. And more importantly now for me than anything, and I think Jono reflected on a bit, wellness and safety, but that's part of being a community.
Yeah.
So we're asking people, and I think I talked before about the fact that I haven't left my home too much. It's been quite convenient. I'm one of those rare people who loves teaching children at home or misaligning their education. I think my daughter's watching at the moment, so maybe I just interfered with her. It's good for lunch and stealing lunch money. But we have to give we have to give purpose to community. That my interactions there are shared values with the people I'm with.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Matt. And I think, those opening about it's those intangibles, the buildings themselves, the structuring, but it's what happens in between that's a really interesting thing. One of the I think the challenges they threw at us for tonight is to take placemaking, which is a really architecturally speaking, it's for the people in the know to really know what it means. So, and I'm really excited to have three of you from different parts of city making and the sort of wider built environment industry. So I'm going to throw to you the big question to start off with. How do you define placemaking? So, Jono, I'm going to go to you first.
I think we know that placemaking is a bit of a buzzword. We sort of spoke about it sort of prior to this, but I think the key part about it is that it is a process rather than an end result. It's an ongoing process, and it doesn't actually have to have a definitive time frame in it. So any kind of good place evolves over time. It changes with different communities' needs, or it changes with whatever technology is coming in. So years ago, we wouldn't have had to have Wi-Fi in open places. Now that's a sort of a must kind of have, and now that with the COVID sort of thing, the safety of those sort of places as well. So good place kind of sort of evolves as buildings are sort of built around it, or people kind of change, cultures change, and and I think that's the kind of key thing about placemaking is it's not a defined sort of time frame process that I sort of see.
Yeah, great. Same question to you, Mike. From your perspective on all those projects, what's placemaking to you?
Well, I prefer to think about it as just place. Placemaking is a kind of like a fashion, I think, a little bit in our industry. Look, it's important. I don't want to diminish it, but it's one part of a broader idea. And I think our state government, I think, to their credit, have really embraced the idea of place in planning as a key driver, and it's a very value-driven way of thinking rather than just being technocrats, planning technocrats. It's saying place is important. Places are real. Places are, people can relate to that. But what is that? What's the creation of that? And there's process. The process is super important, and but also the experience. So this is where the creative side comes in. It's you can eliminate creativity in a process, but you've got to have so design and place and design, I think, with the CEP, is a really great driver of changing culture through the whole of our development industry, but also the community.
Yeah, great. And it's that perspective. It's changing the dynamic of what we're looking at first.
And it cascades down into everything.
Yeah, great. And Matt, from your perspective as well, I mean, you spoke about storytelling, but what are the other elements of how you would define sort of placemaking? Is it a process for you?
I love the word patinaing.
Yeah.
So I love the process of taking on character. And that only comes from experiencing those places, being in them, sweating, crying, laughing, celebrating, bringing those things together. So I think at first you've got to set yourself on a course. You've got to have a vision and a plan. And the great thing about plans and visions, or at least in my world, is that they change. And you adapt and you overcome. But all of us here now in this city and where we've got to in our careers, I think I can speak, have to be brave. So you have to take some risks and move that built thing, that beautiful design, that garden, that streetscape. You have to move it somewhere, and you have to give it a purpose. And so it goes back to storytelling. Everything for me needs to have a narrative, and that narrative fills you up and fills up the things in between the walls. And it's that ether, that concept of ever-expanding universe that comes from it. And it's quite an emotional attachment for me, especially with what we've experienced over the last couple of years. And the embodiment in the project I've worked on of taking heritage, a piece of heritage, and making it part of the envelope of something spectacularly new, and having them juxtaposed against each other to create this landscape is just going to entice people to come in and want to experience it and be part of it. And it's all patinaing as we go. And I love that aging process, which only needs to be a minute, but it can be a lifelong experience as well.
Yeah, and I think it's that patina is a beautiful word, because it's that how do we experience the layers of stories in each of the places that we're sort of in cities and everything. And I love that you all spoke about the process. It's one of the things that I think one of the reasons for that buzzword is that people see it as an outcome, not a process. And you talked about personalities and stories. They're really intangible things. They're not things that you can sometimes touch. They're things that have to be revealed and may take time to reveal. In terms of, let's talk about that process, for all of you, and I'll go to you first, Matt, what's the process that you will go through to uncover that story, to reveal the texture of a place?
Oh, I love the word allegory. So peeling away the layers. So we were talking before this, and I talked about the word emancipation of heritage, which is part of it. So we've got this beautiful place, Hinchcliffe House, and it's got this long history. It was a wool shed. It was part of the Morris brothers. It was the Matthew Talbot Hostel, which is my moniker. And then it's now tipping its hat back to its heritage. It's an Italian restaurant because the market it serviced back in 1880 was the Italian market. And I think that's a natural gift that the heritage has given us. And that's part of the experience of the fact that we borrow these places for future generations. We're vanguards of it, we're protectors of it, and then we expand its opportunity for those who follow us. So nothing we're doing started with us. but we're enhancing the land, we're enhancing the relationship between the spaces and the envelopes. We're taking that original port and the commas that evolved around the city. We're bringing back to life First Nation people's story in our cultural experiences, and we're layering it up. And I sort of think of it like a film. So you see the raw footage of a film, but it's quite, green screen behind us. In fact, there's a green screen behind us now. None of this exists. But without the soundtrack, without the sound effects, without the voiceover, without the thing, and in life, those layers give this story, and that's the purpose of what we do when we go from the ground up. But remember that this is not an original story.
Yeah.
This is a retelling of a story, and hopefully an improvement of that story. But then don't destroy it for that next generation who follows us.
Yeah, fantastic. And Jono, for you as well, what's your process through the work that you do to really reveal and uncover those textures and enhance through the built work that you do and enhance those stories?
I think picking up on Matt's point, I think we're getting better at not just going back to the last kind of history of a place, but to right back to the First Nation story as well, and then how a place evolved in that and into a wool shed, or in my place, we were looking at the Sandstones precinct down there, or at substation where it was a electrical substation and a warehouse, and then it sat vacant for a number of years, and then it becomes, we try and keep that history and that storytelling, and people really like that authenticity.
Yeah.
I think the authenticity and the story of it all actually creates a lot of value.
Yep.
And if you can really harness the real key points of that, people feel the kind of connection and authenticity. They don't like being in places that are completely made up and the narrative is created overnight. And so we try and sort of bring out as much of that real life as possible, and it comes on and sort of pays it back, and the end product that you have has a lot more value, not just financial value, but just inherent kind of value for our occupants, whether it be a commercial space of the building or the spaces surrounding it in the sort of open public places. So we really do try and sort of go back to that history and trying to go back further to like our First Nation stories and further now. And I think we're getting kind of better at that as developers and architects and designers through these days as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And Mike, I mean, being a landscape architect, that very much that connecting to the natural and the physical place that surrounds. I know that you've done a number of projects, but what's your process to connect and reveal the sort of layers and the stories of the places you're coming into?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Look, the first thing that any designer should do, and we should all do really, is just listen. There's just not enough listening. People jump too early.
Yeah.
What I've learned over the years is that and we're designers, so we make things, and we're all in that industry and that endeavour. But making things is often like making sure that you don't make too much, and so there's this constant kind of editing process of resisting ego and stripping back, and just keep hold of the values that you established at the beginning of that listening process, and getting agreement at that point of what is the things, the touchstones that you shouldn't shift from.
Yeah.
And then constantly referring back to those and so that they're clear.
Yeah.
So it's almost like design for me is like boiling down something into it, so that it's almost then down to its essence. It's just that there's one thing.
Yeah, it's like bringing the pieces of the puzzle, and that puzzle, as you said, cities take time. We spoke about it before we started the conversation on air, that they take time and they take commitment and are long. I think to really have a visceral kind of skin in the game, as we say, to do that. And I think picking up on a point that you made there, Mike, about how I think as planners, designers and city makers, we like things to be finished. We like things to be in their space. And I think, you talked about allowing for reinvent, and all of you have spoken about that time and community being able to infuse their own sort of experience and authenticity. So, I mean, it could be a challenge, but how do we as city makers in the different spaces of that built environment industry that we all work in, how can we ensure the community can continue to reinvent places so they respond to the changing societal needs? I think that's a big one, because they're changing so rapidly. How do we do that?
Create some space, leave some space at the end of every project so that there's room for new things to happen.
Yeah, I can hear people sort of
That sounds a bit abstract,
taking
but-
intake of breath by that comment.
Yeah, don't over-program things. Just let it be. You know, like that character of the place that you came to. Hold that and cherish it and bring that forward.
Yeah.
But just that when you leave a project, leave it for the people
Yeah.
to just do their thing. You know,
Yeah.
I think we just make. I think my job's just making stage sets for life. You know.
It's a nice way of looking at it.
The way how do you make a stage? It's pretty much an open thing. It's just very simple.
Yeah, exactly.
And you let people do their thing.
And Jono, is there a project that you can think of or that you know of that, you've seen how it started, the intent, that vision, but it's actually changed over time, that the time and people have sort of infused a completely different sort of idea or feel for the place?
If we kind of go back, if we just keep on Sydney at the moment, I think Martin Place is a really interesting one for me, and what its kind of original intention was just a single little square, then it kind of grew, and then the vision of it has sort of grown over time, where it's kind of this spine now of the city that kind of connects the east and the west, and each time the sort of developer, or building owner kind of adds to it, it's kind of evolving and creating, and they do actually have a good cooperative between the owners surrounding that place as well, and I think there's a really opportunity there for a lot of the building owners to interact with each other and not just be sort of reliant on the governing bodies to kind of create these spaces, but the spaces between the projects and in between is an opportunity to kind of spread those out, so one kind of evolves to the other, and you're not just concentrating on, Matt, your project down there, but it can sort of connect into the sandstones with what we're doing, into something up what you're working on in Sydney Place, and those little gaps in between, that's the real opportunity for us to kind of make some exceptional spaces that actually add to the city rather than everyone doing their own thing over here, and that's where I see we're just sort of seeing the edges of it at the moment, and everyone's starting to look at the value it's called created, and if the parts, it will be sort of greater when they're all sort of put together than some of them. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
See, that's how cities become, over time, and you're making precincts where we're involved in some as well, and but it's also you've got all these problems with issues within a precinct to solve, but you've also got to stay outward focused as well, how you connect back into everything, how you contribute to the body corporate, the community, public
100%.
life. That's what ultimately
We have a
it's
social
about.
contract,
which
goes hand in hand with borrowing the land for future generations. And I think we've moved into this new era of convivial joint endeavour. We want this city to be. We want them to finish up the wharves. We want them to get on with that. Right? We want to be part of that. I think we're knocking down the Carl Expressway as well, aren't we? We've been doing that. we want to integrate those elements and make them flow and work and not break them up or not tread a border or a boundary. We're equally impressed with what's happening on other parts of Circular Quay as we are with Quay Quarter Lanes and with Quay Quarter Tower and then 33 Alfred Street. I mean, it's one part of a fantastic puzzle, that cultural and commercial ribbon. I mean, where would you want to be in the world? Like, where else we're going to be a showcase. We're going to be a spectacular showcase beyond what we've already got to be so proud of.
Yeah, and I think that idea of a social contract is really interesting, and I think for me that's been a real big shift, and I'm really interested in to hear from you about, from the clients you work with, the communities who are, the workers and residents who are eventually working and living in the buildings. What are you finding that their expectations now in terms of that public good or that community benefit that you're providing? What are their expectations, and how has it changed over time? Because I think it's becoming more and more, like I think, Mike, you spoke about the place and design step, and we start to shift how we plan for our cities. I think that narrative is shifting how we do it. But I'm really interested to understand, what is your community expecting from you in terms of public good? John, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, I think community is the interesting word there. It's the community used to be something that was already existing around, but we're sort of now expected, and rightly so, to kind of create this kind of community in sort of our projects, and our clients and our joint partners in certain projects are really sort of looking at community focus first as well. And we're doing a joint venture at Liverpool with Liverpool City Council at the moment, and they're a great council out there that really has the community first and foremost out there. So we're creating a brand new library and public place in Liverpool Civic Place, along with their council chambers and everything. It's really going to add so much value to that kind of community out there as well, which has sort of been emerging as like you know, kind of a really key catchment for Sydney, but hasn't quite sort of had that place altogether.
Yeah.
They were kind of in the past we've relied on shopping malls and other things like that to kind of as our sort of gathering places, and now they're sort of they're creating this really nice community place that will be sort of anchor the city and give that sort of giving back to the residents.
And I think the importance of those non-transactional spaces for people to be in as well becomes really important. You know, as we see, there is such an inequity across the city at times, and so making sure that we're planning for all of that. Mike, same question to you. What have you seen over the years you've been working in this space, and what the community expectations are, and has that translated into what your clients have been asking? And have they been sort of embracing this idea of community good or social contracts?
Wow, that's a big question.
I know. It's Friday afternoon, I like to give the big questions.
One best had over a glass of wine, I think. Answered over a glass of wine. Look, it has changed a lot. I mean, we're all changing. The country's changed. You know, like from when I started practicing 30 years ago, it was a totally different situation. We are more, I think rightly so, we're much more people focused now. We're much more place focused, and I don't think that's just here. It's around the world. And certainly COVID has made that more so, because we've for obvious reasons we've looked to our local. We've rediscovered local. And we're realising that, well, maybe sometimes it's not as good as we'd hoped, because our gaze has been cast elsewhere.
Yeah.
So I think there's been a real kind of turning in a constructive way, and it's not all good, but I think we're all interested in how to go forward together.
Yep.
And I don't think that's going to. We're going to change. We're going back to the new normal. However, I think we're changed for a good time.
Yeah.
Like a long time. This change stays with you for and I think the city. When I say the city, not just the CBD where we are now, but like the whole of the metropolitan area. There's vast inequities, but they're being addressed. I think, but there has to be constant pressure to constant governance and constant public oversight to make sure that the gaze is cast over to expect, and the expectations are set.
Yeah, and it's that responsibility of those of us working in this space to kind of make sure that we're constantly questioning and doing those things.
And public life is the glue that binds us together.
Yeah.
The moment you walk out the door, you're in public life.
Yeah.
You're in a street, you're in a lane, you're in walking down the street to a coffee shop. These are the small moments in life, that make us who we are.
And I think through COVID, they're the moments that we really realised how much we love as well.
Yeah, and just those simple things of just meeting people and being in touch, and they're precious.
Yeah. And to Matt as well. I mean, I love that you talk to story and that sort of there's an emotional connection to that. But I suppose, is that something that has come from your practice? Is it been influenced by what community and your clients have been asking for?
I think there's a natural bent with someone like me who's meant to, I think, curate the messaging, but then I've transferred that into my own way, and I think as you grow in confidence with your life, and you need to be able to be yourself. If we can't be ourselves where we work and what we do, then don't worry about it. Yeah. But for me, the great pleasure of what I've been doing over the last 12 months is working with our clients, and I haven't met one who hasn't, and it's so vast, the opportunity. We've talked about our 2030 ambitions, we've talked about waste streams, we've talked about technology, we've talked about public art and the interaction of the stories in, largest corporates in the country want to invest in the cultural story we're telling from the ground up.
Yeah.
And they're genuine and authentic messaging that they want to participate in. They want to see a reflection of themselves in what we're doing, and they want to know how I'm going to help them have that experience. Not only a service level experience that your card reader works properly or your lift, but how am I going to feel when I arrive in here? And now we've created this sort of, I call it the fourth precinct, this technology space as well.
Yeah.
So it's another interaction you have with them, and they want to know what the environment's like that they work in, so that am I safe here? How much outside air intake am I getting?
Yeah.
How's the greenery? How's the temperature in here, and what's that a reflection of? And I think it's such an enormous opportunity. It's a real pleasure, and I haven't met one client who hasn't covered those areas, and I find it extremely rewarding.
Yeah.
Where do we get our energy from?
Yeah.
What are we going to do in the future for drawing down that energy? How are we going to invest in those things that mean and show purpose for our future generations? It's a great part, and it articulates that it's more than commerce now. It's more than a number, it's about who we are together. And one of our pillars is generosity, but I think that one of my key is kindness. Kindness and courage.
Yeah.
And it's been so lacking in the world, but it's a Disney line that I use with my daughter all the time, or she uses with me, I shouldn't steal it from her. But it's just such a lovely sentiment that you can carry with yourself when you walk through a place and you create something. You have responsibilities to do that with kindness and courage.
Yeah. I mean, I think that generosity is something that is really starting to come into, and from a design perspective, it's the wider footpaths. We see how people along George Street with the light rail and opening up George Street, how they've really embraced those wider spaces and being able to do that. So I think that's really good. I just wanted to remind everyone who's watching us that we do, in about 10 minutes, we'll go to some audience questions, and I can see that there's a few there. So make sure you keep adding your questions into the chat so I can throw them to our panelists. So, and it's okay if they're curly questions. I'm sure that they'll be fine to do it. I think it's really interesting, and I really love, I think that placemaking, there's a positivity that goes with it, but we also know that there's a lot of challenges at times. And I think one of the things is, our public spaces are sort of places of conflict. They're places where different interests wanting a piece of the action. And I suppose, so how do you sort of marry up those different, I suppose, wants, outcomes that people want, and how do you bring those interests together to sort of create and to, I suppose, achieve that collective vision to make better cities? So what's some of the those sort of challenges and considerations you're making, Matt, through your process?
You don't lose sight of the fact that investment can drive progress. So I can be overwhelmed with the opportunity to talk about public art and that, but I have a responsibility to deliver and create value so that the investment continues, so that we can continue to progress. I think there's been some wonderful stories for billionaires around the world who are exploring space and doing fantastic thing in green scaling for us. And I think that they're all methods of investment. They need financial resources to drive them. So when you're talking to investors or people who've invested in your business, it's being completely founded in your responsibility and accountability to deliver those outcomes. You can't get distracted with ego. I think, Mike, you said that right at the beginning. Egos and pride and things that will let you down enormously. So being authentic, being genuine, and knowing what you've got to do to deliver the outcome necessary to continue to grow that investment and to create those returns is critical. And making sure people have a clear vision of what they're investing in. What are we creating here? What are the milestones? And then appreciating I have an accountability and responsibility for them, or they'll move their capital somewhere else, and that's a loss for you.
Yeah, and Mike, I mean, I think that we talked about the different sort of stories that sort of layer a place. How do we I mean, because I think one of the challenges we all face is hearing the same voices and hearing the same stories, and that the loudest voice always sort of gets heard. How do you, through your process, enable those voices that might not necessarily be the loudest? How do you to allow their stories and their sort of idea of what the place should be? How do you kind of reveal those?
Well, look, we're not designing it for ourselves, we're designing it for other people.
Yeah.
So you've got to put yourself in their shoes and ask yourself, well, yes, there's community consultation and you're in that space and you do a great job in bringing a lot of understanding to projects. But as a designer, I guess it's sort of empathy in a way. It's just ultimately you've just got to try and understand who people are and how they are and treat everyone the same.
Yeah.
And if you're of that mind, that you're not designing it for your ego. You're not designing it for what's the purpose of this project is to serve others.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we're just here to serve others. That's my feeling on design.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a really lovely thing I heard about diversity is being invited to the dance. That inclusivity is actually being invited to dance. And so I'm going to throw to you, Jono. How are you inviting people to the dance that you're doing?
Well, to pick up on a few of these analogies, we had Mike's creating the set, but I think it's a really kind of good one. But the community are the actors and the users of the play or the dance or whatever, and if they have the appropriate set to kind of to use those space in the best possible way, then they're going to create the best kind of outcome for that play or whatever, and then that's going to be, as an analogy, the best sort of financial outcome, which then revolve back around to the start, that allows us to invest more back into this sort of place. So I think if you start to look at these places straight from a financial outcome at the start, that's when you're going to be, getting yourself into kind of trouble if that's the outcome you kind of look for. Yeah. It's building the sort of building blocks or the canvas or the set or whatever you kind of need to do to create those users and often, we shouldn't dictate exactly how they use, but allowing that flexibility for the user generated I guess, kind of outcomes in the end that is going to get the best result, and allowing enough flexibility, and that's the smartest kind of design, when you leave the edges kind of, as Mike said, not built out to kind of allow something unexpected to happen. And they're the most, they're the best outcomes when the unexpected use of a space sort of ends up becoming probably the best, outcome of it all.
Yeah, there's not too much, think of that stage, there's not too much on a stage, you just let other people, fill it.
Yeah, and I think that's, people love the surprise of cities. It's that the reason why public art becomes, I think, such an important part of our landscape, our sort of urban landscape, because you can walk around a corner and be surprised by this sort of beautiful creative endeavour, and I think being able to allow for some of that surprise to happen that we don't design out.
I would say the other thing about all of this is that I'm talking about stages, and I realise I'm talking about just an object, and cities are about process and environment, and one of the key, we're living in a world of rapid climatic change and calamity, impending calamity if we don't change our habits, and repurposing cities for that, and to make them, render them more resilient, and ourselves more resilient is, I think is a responsibility in making places as well.
Yeah, I think we've all been on a path of resilience for the last couple of years across the world. So
don't talk to me about resilience. I'm over it.
we've got a number of questions that I'm seeing flick up, which is fantastic. And I actually, taking the point that you're making there, Mike, we've got a question from Tracy. And Tracy asks, how do we resolve the issues of legacy where public places are no longer activated? It's a really interesting point, because if we're trying to kind of create those places and still hark to what they were, if they're no longer activated, how do we reinvent them? How do we resolve those issues of legacy?
Well, lots of places, every place has life, and life comes and goes. I think there's lots of places that have been repurposed and fashioned, and cities are constantly changing and shifting and making themselves better to suit the needs of the day and the future. You've got to keep your eye on the future as well as now.
Yeah.
I think that's just that's government seeing it. Like the City of Sydney, for example, is fabulous at leading change, and then it's all the people like us all sharing common values, and all working together.
And I know that, Jono, you were talking earlier about the sort of that value of heritage, and some of those you were talking about buildings who haven't been used for 30 odd years or something like that. How do you deal with the legacy issues around those heritage buildings and those heritage spaces?
Well, I think that's the opportunity, right? That's the stuff that excites me, the adaptive reuse of a space that was previously either a substation or a warehouse. And maybe in the future there will be old car parks when we don't have a use for them anymore, or some other kind of use, and sort of adapting those spaces kind of creates some constraints, but it does create a lot of opportunities to create some of these spaces like the brewery yard. In there is, you would never design that from scratch because of the floor to ceiling heights are much too generous than what they would give away now, but it creates an amazing opportunity to put new life into the building that was completely different use. But it would be the most interesting space, or will be, once it's kind of all sort of up and running. So I look at that, and that's, this is not a problem just for now. It's been going on, forever, and it's also, but it's really, we see that as an opportunity for us to that, and I think the same can be used for, open public spaces, not just buildings as well.
That value of adaptive reuse, that's what cities are constantly doing. We're adaptively reusing our cities, and the key thing you have to do there is just understand what you're using, and that's what I return to, and what you're repurposing. That's why I return to listening. I mean, what I mean by listening is listen to what's there. If that sounds, look at what's there, understand what's there.
And that's the attraction of the project I'm on. That's the reason that drew me out of it. When you get down to Circular Quay, you see this new building there. 60% of the old building's retained in that structure. The core's still there. It's the largest urban renewal project in the world. Almost 8,000 tonne of carbon's been caught inside of that project. We're going to be working on 33 Alfred in the years to come as well. That's the first skyscraper in Sydney. We're going to grow it and expand on it, but we're going to retain its beauty and wonder for the city. But I've got around this city right now, the Art Gallery of New South Wales is expanding, and it's taken I'm going to make up a number here, 40 gigalitre former Navy fuel tanks, and they're going to form part of, and they've been stuck in the landscape overlooking Woolloomooloo there forever. It's amazing. It's like going through a wondrous chamber of adventure, and I can't wait to see how they fill it up with art and experience, like Jono's projects and seeing Central Park come to life, and watch the dream. When I first saw the renders, and now I can see the green landscape spilling out, we should be really proud of how we've adapted and reused, and we've got challenges in the city. Callan Park's one of the bigger ones that's constantly on people's agendas and on minds, and so many people have looked at it, but so entrenched in the passion. The community haven't been won over there. And you've got, again, that's what we're doing. We're talking about communities and precincts and places. It is about community, which is in part compromise, because we're sharing space with one another, and we have to be able to listen and compromise to create the best outcome for all of us.
And I mean, it's quite funny. I mean, I suppose a follow-up for that quickly is are we trying to win everybody over? I don't know. Are we trying to create the places and I suppose, do you consider potentially in that reinvention of place who potentially might be displaced?
Well, there's an old saying or an old adage, I can't remember where it's come from, but if everyone's agreeing with me, then I've done something wrong. So I don't think any of us here from meeting to discuss are fading away from controversy. In fact, we're inviting a discussion. We invite the conversation. Changing the discourses about what we want to do. We've got to do it. We can't be wringing each other's necks, I'm right and you're wrong. That world's gone. This is about respect, listening, sharing, compromising, and then I never
And
thought of-
leadership.
Yep.
And leadership as
Yeah,
well.
really important.
You've got to lead from the front. You've got to make change, but respectfully and bring people along. I don't know how that happens. It's that's the world of politicians mostly, but we're all leaders in our way, and I think you've got to say things clearly and have people know your purpose, what your intent is, so that they can make a choice. But there is that circling back in leader, in all walks of life, to make sure that there's always people that are less. There's winners and losers, I guess. But make sure that we hold everybody up.
Yep.
That's the Australian way.
Yeah. It's what I think all of you have said at some point tonight, is the generosity and the kindness. It's the empathy. It's those sort of emotions that we need to think into decision making of what we're doing. Katie asked a really big question, so I'm going to throw it to all of you. On a global scale, and I love the competitiveness, on a global scale, who's doing placemaking the best? Matt, I'm going to go to you. You look like you've got an answer there.
There are too many. I've seen this film centre in Jordan. Yeah. It's an outdoor film precinct. It's spectacular. It just covers so much of their society's interests and need. It's a remarkable place. The High Line in New York's a remarkable journey, but Governor's Island, I mean, they're the exemplars for people like us with what they've done and that journey on blistering hot New York days, walking around there and picking up an ice cream, having it melting and looking at this extraordinary architecture in the harbour, and it's astounding. But I looked recently at a project in I think in Holland, I think it's Nordhaven project. It's a renewal project, and it's a 5-minute city, but what they're doing for energy, how they're containing and saving and using artificial intelligence to manage their city, mind-blowing.
Yep.
They're all lessons for us. But to all of these conversations about people, my family and I went to New York in 2017 after we loved the place, been there enough times to know that we wasted a lot of money, but it was dour and heavy and laden with angst and fear and anger, and it was completely uninviting. The streets were too crowded. Central Park looked like a mess, and I was working at Centennial Parklands then, and I was so proud. And the Botanic Garden, there were such beautiful places compared to what I saw. It was drudge and dreary. So we send a message, leadership, back out to the world.
I'm going to say we do it pretty well. We've got too much tall poppy syndrome. You go to we are bloody good at what we do. And we should be much more accepting of that, rather than kind of this tall poppy syndrome which haunts us a bit. But we hold Australia holds public life dear. We're one of those. We're a rare thing in the world. There's not. So we're leaders. We're imperfect. And we've got a lot of improvement to do, particularly at the federal government level.
But isn't that the thing about creative placemaking, is about experimenting and trying things. And Ash has asked a question about what has the pandemic taught us about the importance of placemaking in local communities. I think Mike, you alluded to, but Jono, what have we learned in the pandemic? What lessons can we take for the future and use placemaking to better our local communities?
Yeah, well, I thought, in the month of picnic month down in Sydney here, when that was sort of our limit of what we wanted to do, it was just amazing. I went to so many places on the weekends where there were just people just so happy to be allowed out to socialise, and how good our parklands were. Centennial, there was a great sort of vibe down in there, down by in the Botanic Gardens, people sitting around, and everywhere, all the parks that you would drive around. And I think we take it for granted a bit what amazing spaces we have in and around the city, and we'd drive around and maybe people kick the footy there on the weekend or whatever, but not to actually sit and meet. And that's where we, the opportunity, you don't have to meet in a restaurant or a bar every time, but you can use all these amazing spaces that we have kind of around us. So I think that sort of personally taught me a lesson, is like, you know, there's so many good little spots to kind of gather and socialise, which is the fabric of life, right? And they don't just have to be where we've sort of programmed into sort of restaurants and bars. But
It's true, and we have great places, but I would also say that there's Western Sydney is like underprovided in green space. They don't have the things that, you know, we have here. I think we've got it. This is about bringing everyone along and making sure.
But you've got to push that, right?
Yeah.
So it's like what we've talked about, some of the themes for someone like me, and not to get into work hat off and personal hat on, really, is you need to see reflections of yourself in what you want to do, but that applies equally in that diversity space. So we have to push ourselves out there. You have to force us out into Western Sydney to give them the opportunity to revel in the same things a century.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's being brave again. That's courage and bravery to push those limits, and that requires that investment for the value we can create.
Yeah, and it's that walking in others' shoes. It's about really understanding that. And I think one of the I say great things about the pandemic, it wasn't great, but one of the things I think we saw was the value of public space, and how, you know, I know in the work I do, I find myself less having to explain or to convince people that public spaces are really valuable, and I think that's been a really nice thing. Yeah. Hendry, we've got a question from Hendry. They ask that people, users make places. So how do we quarantine certain uses, for example creative uses, so that we don't lose them when places get gentrified? And I think this is a big issue for Sydney, because it's that highest and best use argument that we're always having. So how do we, and I don't know, is quarantine the right word? How do we maybe support, protect those sort of uses that really are at the heart of that sort of vibrant, dynamic activity we're trying to do? Matt, I'll go to you first.
Well, it's the word, I'm trying to think of a better word, but it's resilience. Most of the places I've worked at over the last 30 years are active places. They invite people, they make noise.
Yeah.
If you live around them, it's not always fun, because it's not noise you like, but it's compromise that you've got to find with what you do. You can't, you've got to hold on to values, you've got to set those values. Again, clear vision, clear leadership, have a value proposition around what you've created that's reflective of the community you want to create and the culture you want to stand by. And that comes with challenges, and that means that you've got to make sure that the amenity is there for everyone, but you've also got to withstand criticism. And you're going to get, if you take risks, you're seeking reward, but you're trying to create something, you're going to invite. You can't let it detract you.
Yeah.
There's another adage I have, is often wrong but never in doubt. So sometimes you win and sometimes you learn, which is again something I learned off my daughter. She's a very smart girl. And I think that's always the message. I can be wrong.
Yeah.
God forbid, but I can be wrong, and I can learn, and I can listen, and I can learn something from it, and I can grow it. So I can protect, and I can be a vanguard, but that doesn't mean that you're recalcitrant and you're not going to listen.
I think like the creative space for creatives.
Yeah.
It shifts. Like I think the creative heart of Sydney is not in the CBD or the fringes anymore. It's out in Parramatta and places like that, where there's more grit and more challenge and more. That's where real creativity kind of emerges in cities. It's just shifting. And yeah, we're sanitising the inner city in some ways, but you know, places like Marrickville still have character, and there's still some gritty places.
Yep.
Urco and Newtown and even Chippendale maybe.
Yeah, it's changing.
But like Parramatta and Blacktown and Liverpool, you know, these places, Campbelltown, they're all becoming they've got cheaper land, I guess, as well. Yeah, so it's just, I don't know. I think there's still. Sydney's a dynamic place.
Because I see a little less of, you know, gentrification pushing creatives out than they're trying to chase the creatives, and the creatives are the ones moving themselves, and they don't want to be there anymore when it's, you know, a certain sort of, it changes enough, and looking for the next kind of creative way to kind of do it. So it's a natural evolution. I said, so it's, you know, sometimes it can be bad, I agree, and if they are actually pushed out, but I think a lot of the time it's them being chased rather than being sort of pushed. And
There is a shortage of, you know, cheap land. Land has just gone up, so it's more expensive. So it is. You know, it's a real problem, and manufacturing the solution, I'm not sure is the answer either.
No, but it's layering up opportunity.
Yeah.
If you want to invite creative people to participate in your space, you've got to give them the opportunity. So that's services, that's fundamentals.
Just
transport. There are linkages.
Basics.
There's connections there that enable them to develop their creativity, to feel like they can without having to worry about how I'm going to get here or work there or set that up. And you know, those are the layers that come with that responsibility. It's all nice up here, but have we built the foundations to give them success?
And that's that citywide infrastructure, that public infrastructure to create 5-minute or 15-minute or 30-minute cities.
We've got another 5 minutes, and I think it's a topic that we could be sitting around talking about. There's one final question before we sort of close out that I want to ask, and Sarah's asked the question and I think it's really important. You know, what's the connection between unique community characteristics and creative placemaking? So I'm happy. I'm looking at you, Mike.
What's the connection?
I mean, I think it's interesting. We talked about Western Sydney and that creativity there, and there's that cultural layer that comes out, that really rich cultural.
Yeah, look, I think just understand your audience. I think, you know, I can't think of any other way to say it. It's just know who you're there to serve. That's
that listening piece again, right? And sort of listening to your audience and
giving them the courtesy of giving them enough space and breathing room to be part of it. You know, so many places look like we've all been in space, but do I belong in here? I'm not sure whether I'm here. I should be here.
Yeah.
That should never happen.
Yeah.
That should not be in our world. You know, that's it. That's where some are invited and others are excluded. Yeah. That's just not not fair.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's my answer to that one.
Matt, to you.
Diversity, colour, flavour, cooking. Like one of the great pleasures I'm having at the moment is just and I've got the palate of a black coffee, and it's not very good, but food. Telling stories, bringing authentic people in, and out west, I mean, you get that. Like for me, the 3 a.m. kebab was a tradition, but that expands it into far more social conversation, allowing people to have community festivals and celebrating community and celebrating who they are. But it doesn't mean it's celebrating your heritage, whatever it is, and celebrating your diversity. And again, it's like pushing out into regions to support them. You have to adopt a practice of giving them the opportunity to be themselves and see themselves reflected in leadership roles and in opportunities. And if we have to make that happen, I'd be someone who says, well, we need to mandate positions in a parliament. We need to see people, and then they can aspire to those things, and they can do that free to be unique. And to be creative.
Yeah, I think it's that for me. It's that placemaking is about being invited to the dance, maybe. Russ.
Yeah, I was going to say it links it back in together. Invited to the dance, the inclusion, and then creating the set for everybody to play on.
Yeah, fantastic,
absolutely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for all your questions. As I said, I think we could be talking about this for another couple of hours if they let us, but they won't. So it is all the time that we have tonight. So thank you so much for joining us, and I want to thank all our speakers, Jono, Matt and Mike. There's a couple of M's there. Really appreciate your time, and I've really loved having this conversation with you all and getting those different perspectives. Thank you to everyone who's joining us online. We really appreciate you joining us for Friday evening to talk about creative placemaking. I really want to encourage you to keep exploring Sydney Open this year for the rest of the month, for November, and it's all on the website, which is at slm.is.au. Sydney.com/open. So get out there, have a look around, enjoy the city, enjoy what the city has to offer, and explore. You know, get to know your place and start making your place, I think, is what we would really encourage people to do. You can find podcasts, virtual and audio tours, more panel talks like this one. There's a couple of great ones coming up, so really encourage you to look at those. Our next online panel is Regenerate, Creating a Greener Sydney, and that's tomorrow at 11 a.m. So a nice sort of, I think, coming off what we spoke about tonight. So thank you all for joining us, and hope to see you at more of the Sydney Open events. So thank you so much.